Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
All right, welcome back to another edition of the Advancement Podcast. Woo-hoo! If you enjoy what you're listening to, go and rate us on all of the platforms that you listen to your podcast. If you could also subscribe, that way it's sent directly to your phone or device that you're listening to every day that we release a podcast. We usually release on Tuesdays and Thursdays of every week. If you're watching, you can like us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. My name is Todd Barr. I'm the host of the Advancement Podcast with today, lead consultant Tim, or the lead consultant of Advancement Coaching and Consulting.
Yep.
Timothy Ware.
Timothy Ware.
How you doing?
I'm good.
I tried to give my best baseball introduction.
You're gonna have to work on
Yeah.
it. You've been watching more You have always been more football.
I have been, but
you got to learn. You got to get work. You need to listen to some Harry Carey.
I've been meaning to tell you something. I saw that the DH. I saw another article that the DH is going to be dead. I know you're a big DH fan, so
I hate the DH. Kill the DH. Kill the designated hitter. It ruins baseball.
Well, I've heard if they come back after all this coronavirus, that it'll be a universal DH for American and National League. That's what I've read.
That's not killing it.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Expanding it. They're killing the notion of the pitcher hitting, which is
disgusting.
Which helps baseball in my opinion.
Disgusting.
Because in the NL, the pitcher is the automatic out. So
it's disgusting.
For the most part.
Anyway, that's disgusting.
We need a moment. Tim's gonna have to collect himself.
Anyway, so hey guys, if you're a first time listener or a consistent listener, we're excited today. We're having with our guest that we have on with us, Chris Delaurentis. I don't want to cut it. Cut to the chase.
This is part 2, so they can go listen to part 1 if they want to.
You need to listen to part 1, but I want to cut to the chase a little bit because Chris, we just got so much we want to cover.
Yeah.
And it's just so. I think some of the things we're talking about are so important. So we want to kind of skip into it pretty quickly. Chris and his wife Monica they are the founders of the Life Center Church in the inner city, downtown Minneapolis, in inner city Minneapolis, Minnesota, and they're the founders of the Inner City Christian Ministries, which has feeding programs and does discipleship and outreach, and they started this in 1993.
Wow!
In their home.
I was in 3rd grade.
Well, I was married and in ministry by then. So so Chris and Monica, they started with 35 drug addicts and homeless people in their apartment. That's where they started their church, and all these years later they've now, he told us in the last podcast that I knew they had planted one other ministry across the nation, but he said they've actually launched 7 other ministries over the years, coming up on 30 years almost, getting close. Getting close. And for those who happen to, if the audio gets a little weird or the video, Chris told us that because he's in Minneapolis, that they're with YouTube and social media and just the things are a little haywire technology wise, but he's changed his background on Zoom.
Yeah.
He's got a nice green screen.
He's standing outside in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I'm in front of my house at night, right downtown Minneapolis.
There you go. That's right. So it's just great. I told everybody that, Chris and we've known them, Rachel and I've known them for 12 years, and they are, Monica is the preacher. She's hard. She's serious preacher. Not that Chris can't preach, but she's all in.
Man, you know what? I was preaching at a church, and this one lady said, "Oh, that was great. That was one of the best services we ever had." She goes, "I can't believe that your wife is better than you." And then about a year later, we were back at that church, and Monica preached, and you know, you forget about stuff, but anyway, she comes to me after that service. She goes, "You don't remember this, but you told me your wife is better. You're right. She is better than you."
Wow.
So Chris and Monica, I tell people that I think having gotten to know Chris as much as I have, and we've had, when we get together, we end up having conversations that a lot of the rest of the people in our crowd don't engage in quite as much, because we get into leadership theory and these things. Chris is one of the best, if not the best, strategic leader I have met in any context from as far as ministry leadership, and which is pretty cool that he's in an inner city context. Actually, when we first met, a lot of people don't know this, but Rachel and I, we spent 2.5 years working in inner city, in the inner city of Dallas, and that's when we first met Chris and Monica. So some of what they do has a deep place in our heart because of some of the things that we have in our past. You know, the Lord didn't ask us to stay there like he has with Chris and Monica, which brings us to our topic. Well, before we get into our topic, Chris, for those who are with us, just give a little update. Today we're recording on Tuesday, June the 2nd. So for those who are listening, give them a quick update on what's going on in Minneapolis as of this moment, as of this morning.
Well, in the first podcast, I've kind of given you a rundown of what has ensued since Memorial Day, when George Floyd was killed on 38th in Chicago. So since that, we've all seen the videos of the buildings burning. We've seen the protesters. We've seen the highway shut down. Just last night, we saw the truck that somehow was on the highway, and the barriers got put up behind him, and he's driving, and he ends up driving through the crowd of thousands of protesters. We all saw that. You know, so every day there's just so much chaos going on. It's hard to understand. You know, one thing that has happened especially in the last few days, is really, it's great to see the church at large rising up in prayer, rising up not in protest, but in prayer. I just got an email while we're doing this that there's going to be a large interfaith prayer meeting at North Central University, which is not an interfaith university, right?
Right.
But that's what's going to happen there. There's going to be prayer walks today in St. Paul to the Capitol, and then at a Sabathani Center, which is a community center in one of the Black neighborhoods of Minneapolis, to Ground Zero where George Floyd was killed. And so these are all faith things where it's great to see the church becoming active, not with signs of anger, not with fingers pointing and of accusation, not with words about political leaders, but with prayer. And I think that that's so important for the church to engage that way and to show itself as a body of help in a time of need.
Yeah. So for those of you who are regular listeners or first-time listeners, the introduction of our podcast says that at Advancement that we're about helping create healthy leaders, and that we're healthy teams, and we want to help facilitate healthy change. And all of these are in the context of taking the gospel into the world. And today, Chris is a great leader, and we're going to have a leadership conversation to help our leaders know how to do things in a healthy way and leading their teams. But it's also a great opportunity for us to recognize that we can be a part of the positive things that are to bring change, both within our organizations, within our churches, within our nonprofits, within our businesses, but also in the greater society.
Yeah.
Which is, the gospel, when you look from the day of Pentecost and you look at what was going on through the book of Acts, there is something about, we're supposed to be, I love the fact that in an accusation made about Paul in Ephesus was that he was a plague, that he was a contagion. And so this idea that we're supposed to be this contagious thing in our society. So today is a very special, in my heart, day to see us merge all of those things together in a significant way. And I'm so privileged. I feel so privileged that Chris would do this on short notice in the midst of everything that he's having to lead through. And today so let me give a little history.
Okay.
I grew up in a country town, and
we're all surprised.
I know, it's such a surprise. But in our little town of 500, it was probably.
How do you spell town?
You didn't know that was 2 syllables? You didn't know that was a 2-syllable word?
I'm sorry. Sorry for
There's more than one vowel. That's how you spell it.
No, don't ever apologize for making fun on here.
Don't apologize for making fun of him.
Don't
Okay.
apologize. We just don't be that way. But Rachel says that when I get around my brothers, y'all think I have a hick accent. Now when I get around my brothers, it just drifts real fast. It turns super hick. But so in the we're going to talk about social unrest and leading in times of social unrest, because truth be told, that's been your leading in the inner city for almost 30 years. You have lived in a place where there have been moments of social unrest. There have been where every time that something has happened over the last decade in a racial context, you guys have been in a place where you've had to navigate that. And here you are at the epicenter of this current movement, which feels bigger than Rodney King and Ferguson. It feels bigger than all of those things. To me, I remember, we worked in the inner city, and I grew up riding. Where we lived in the country, my school bus route, because it was, we lived a long ways from the school. I was one of 6 white kids on a bus full of black kids. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that I see in the society, I have always struggled reconciling them. I have never been in a position to really, I'll just be honest, I've never been in a position where I was asked to lead significantly in the midst of a time of social unrest. And I just think this is a great conversation for us to have, and we have a great leader to help us as we talk through that. So I hope you're as a listener will stay engaged with us. Go back and listen to the last episode as we talk about leading in the midst of social unrest. Which, Chris, if I can just kick us off with a question that you hinted at in the last episode about how you were responding to COVID and then responding to this. I think the majority of, there are over 110,000 congregations across interfaith congregations that call themselves Christian in America. And we love everybody in the body of Christ, and we work with everybody in the body of Christ. And I think that one of the questions that so many people ask is, when and how, when do I know that it's time for us to step into that void and get involved? Or when do we know we should move? when there's social unrest? Because in some towns there's always some kind of unrest, but when do we know it's time for us to lean into that void?
Wow. Well, sorry for the silence. I wasn't ready for that question.
Sorry about
The
that.
deep questions from
I'm
a
a
country
deep-
boy.
I might be a country boy, but we're deep thinkers.
As you say, we got to get our boots on. It's getting deep in
That's
here.
right.
So I guess we began our ministry in 1993 in the middle of a different type of social unrest. So in 1993, murders were doubling every year in Minneapolis. We just graduated North Central University. We worked for Teen Challenge, and we saw this huge gang influence coming into Minneapolis, and so what was happening was crack was selling for twice the price as it was in Chicago or Gary at the time. So gangs were literally fighting for place. New York Times had on their headlines calling Minneapolis Murderapolis, you know. So literally my wife and I just said, let's start a church. Let's infect our neighborhood. Let's try to reach our neighbors. All right. So I believe that I believe that we have continued to be motivated by the injustice or by the inequity or by the problems or the things that attack our hearts, right? And our first response is, what should we do? You know, there are times where it's I feel bad for them and I don't do anything. But whenever we respond with, what can I do? Man, it just sets an explosion off of events and rallying and people coming together, and action brings the body together like nothing else. You know, action, especially when the actions are focused outside of the church. You know, I don't get riled up by a big Christian rally coming into the stadium. I'm sorry. All right, like I don't put the banner on my building. It just doesn't excite me to have a church party. But even though I might attend, but what excites me is when the body, man, makes those steps out in faith, goes into scary places, does things they don't know, and where only God can come through, and it really brings the church together like nothing else.
So I wrote down three things that really stem from the idea that this is a spirit-led process, and there is a somewhat of a unique piece because of the diversity of things that could cause unrest and the diversity of who God's called us as leaders. That you said, what attacks your heart? And that the same things don't always attack all of our hearts, but it's in that diversity of what attacks our hearts that we get to cover all the needs.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
And when that attacks your heart, you ask the question, what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
And that there are always gospel-centric moments. You said that where you have to look at faith. I cycle through. I read the Gospels continuously. I feel like the Lord, that's something the Lord has just burdened me with. I cycle through the Gospels, and I'm always amazed at how Jesus, there's a pattern that he points out in his disciples, their lack of faith, and that when he sees moments of faith, whether it be the Syrophoenician woman, or it be the widow, or it be the centurion, he says, "Oh, look, that's a moment of faith." Look at the great faith that Jesus is looking for these faith moments, and you're saying that when we walk into dark places, I think that's a great. I love that, Chris, because another thing that when we study the scripture is that in the darkest moments, the darkest times is where the greatest miracles took place.
Yeah.
It's true. And, and a dark moment isn't always like a sin or a sinful place or sometimes darkness is really just not knowing the outcome, right? It's a stepping out. It's like stepping out literally in faith where you don't have any clue of, it's like walking into a black room. You don't know where the chairs are, but you're supposed to go in a certain direction, right?
Wow.
And that's what I have found over and over again, especially in these crisis moments of COVID, and then most recently with George Floyd. It's every day has been walking into a dark space.
Yeah.
So, Chris, how do we effectively lead in this and have an opinion? Because I found in the culture we have today, everything is just super politically charged. And if you have an opinion or you express something that is different than the opinion of maybe somebody else, our culture tends to attack. I mean, even COVID-19 has somehow become political, a virus. And we know that all this that's going on in Minneapolis is very politically charged. But how do we express an opinion and lead people in this without creating more enemies, which I don't even know if it's possible. So how do we do that? How do we express an opinion and call darkness or evil, but still not alienate people as we lead?
Well, one, we have to know our audience, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in a small circle of people that have the same beliefs of us, right? We can probably share our opinions, right?
Yeah.
But if we've been called to lead through service, if we've been called to be missionaries to our world, right? We're not trying to make the world, we don't gain a foothold, we don't gain influence until we understand the people we're trying to reach. You can't make a comment about Black Lives Matter unless you first have made the attempt to understand what it is that they feel, what it is that they think, what it is that people who've grown up in the inner city have experienced. It's not enough to say, well, America's fair and equal and everyone has the same opportunity. You can say that all day long, but that's not the experience or the thought process of the people we're trying to help, right? Yeah. And so we have to be Jesus, and we have to become first empathetic and compassionate and do our homework of the people we're trying to help. And so some opinions we need to keep to ourselves.
Yeah.
Because it discredits the experience of someone else. You can say all day long that's not right or that's right, but you're not going to convince them, right? Another person.
Chris, I'm glad you talk about that, because it's about this harvest centric piece that you keep referring back to, and I think is so important. I think sometimes as Christian leaders that we forget that we'll shape our language towards the church and in spite of the harvest, instead of shaping our language towards the harvest and expecting and allowing the church to come over to this side. That's that indigenous principle.
Yeah.
Understand your harvest and move into that.
Well, you're almost saying that the harvest is more important than our opinion. And I think we've flipped it. We think our opinion is more important than the harvest that we have to face.
I think that's true. I was talking with a 26, 27-year-old leader, one of these borderline Gen Z or millennial guys, and he's talking about planting a church or pastoring a church, and and he was saying some of the things that Chris alluded to there. And, you know, there is the impoverished piece, but he was being courted by a church in a very wealthy neighborhood. And he said, why would I want to go there? I said, well, there's a harvest of people there that don't know Jesus.
Yeah.
I said, you know, I said, you just have to understand that they have different needs. If you pastor there, there's still a harvest, and it's different. I told him, I said, that individual carries a huge burden for sex trafficking. And I said, well, who do you think pays for it?
Yeah.
I said, it's not the poor guy.
Yeah.
It's the wealthy guy. They need Jesus too. You just have to see the issue, because these issues permeate our society. We just have to see them in the context of the harvest Jesus is asking us to reach, because not everybody's called to the inner city. Rachel and I didn't stay there. We only spent 2 years there.
Yeah.
But knowing your harvest and shaping your language, and I really like.
Let's take a moment and hear a word about advancement.
Do you feel like your church is stuck in a rut? Then we've got the answer for you here at Advancement. Do you need some personal coaching or maybe some leadership coaching? We can help you out. Contact the Advancement team at info@advancement.cc or check out the website at advancement.cc.
Now let's get back to the podcast.
I'd really like that understand your harvest piece, Chris.
Yeah.
Was it Stephen Covey who wrote that seek first to understand, then to be understood?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and I think everyone has to be honest with themselves of what they believe. And then they have to be willing to say, am I willing to listen to someone else? You know, here in the protests, there are most of the people, thousands, are very peaceful, right? And they're chanting and they're peaceful, but there's a few that are anarchists, right? And that believe that change won't come unless you burn a building down. And so it's really easy for all of us to just discredit the people that we don't agree with, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm giving no credit to the actions, right? However, there has to be a point. So we were doing a worship service in the middle of the protest. There's cars burning behind us. This was just a few days ago. And some anarchists came, they started unplugging our sound equipment. Get away from here. We don't want you here. You know, you can't be here. And some Black Muslims who were peaceful came and they started doing security for us. All right. And then my son, who was on the guitar and leading worship, he goes, are you expressing your free speech? And the anarchist said, yes. And he goes, well, can I express it with you? Right. And then suddenly, literally, this God moment, between that and between our security that we didn't have until that moment, things dissipated, right? And so there was a moment where we were able to engage in dialogue with somebody, you know. And now that's a real small window, but can we put that window on social media, right? Can we put our actions on our conversations where we value another person in spite of what they're doing, but in valuing somebody as they are, so that they can at least hear us, right? If they never hear us, if they never hear the word, there's never a chance for change. So
yeah. So Chris, being a Christian leader in the inner city, working in the context you work, being part of, being out there with the protesters, leading a march, those kind of things. There are, no matter where you stand on any issue, there's going to be an opportunity for someone else of faith to not just politics, but someone else of faith to attack you.
Yeah.
Sure. The fact that earlier in the podcast, you said that Monica's a better preacher. There are people who would say, what's she doing preaching? When when someone confronts you in the moment, and who is supposed to be a person of faith, and you're a leader, that's how do you respond on the faith side, not just the world side?
Sure. In the same way, with humility. So, um, I posted something on Facebook the other day, and I said a phrase that I said love. I said love trumps hate, and no I had no thought of Donald Trump, but of the idea that love wins over hate, right? And then, but because we're so polarized right now, okay, that phrase, certain people, I had, whatever, hundreds of likes, and then I had certain people who it became political, and so immediately I edited my page because it was misunderstood, right? So I have to be learning myself all the time and changing all the time. I am not going to put my feet in cement to where I don't change if my message doesn't become clear, right? And I was there was a friend of mine, one of our board members, who posted something that I don't think was his intention, but he's a little more conservative than me, right? And so I just sent him a nice message, and I said, I love you so much, but here's what I thought about this, right? Just a private message. And he ended up changing his, right? um, and uh, and we have to identify that we have to become learning how to communicate. I have to be honest that 4 years ago in the last election, I really fell prey to thinking that my opinions would change anyone's thoughts about a certain candidate or not, right? And I wasted a lot of energy and a lot of time because I wasn't listening. All I was doing was speaking, you know.
Wow.
Um, my life got so noisy because of all the anxiety and all the dialogue back and forth that was fruitless, right? That the Holy Spirit spoke to me. So here I am, old and hopefully still learning. And where now I strive not to be absent in the conversation, but to speak words that really bring true change and bring people together. Not denying, I'm not denying my action. My actions show that I want to be engaged in the crisis, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I want my words to build and not destroy, because we have huge society problems these days.
I know you're fixed to ask a question, but I want to repeat something that I heard you just say. I want our listeners to catch this phrase. Speaking without listening wastes energy.
Yeah.
Speaking without listening wastes energy. Wow.
Yeah.
That's poignant right there. We have to turn that into a tweetable moment, right?
There you go. Chris, and I know that this next question is going to be a little bit of me trying to solve the whole world's problems. And I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just asking because you're in a different context than me. Here in the South, a lot of people run into, Chris didn't grow up, or Chris, you're Tim didn't grow up this way, but I grew up in a very racially charged area of the world, and the South tends to be very racially charged even still today. And the town that I pastor in is still very racially charged. The problem is everyone's a lot of people are racist, but they're racist in disguise. They don't always show it until things like this come out.
Sure.
And so how do I lead in an area where I am listening and understanding the culture, but I lead them away from this bad way of thinking that's really been bred into every fiber of their being. I mean, they grew up this way. I want my kids, I have 4 kids. The youngest is 1. I want them to grow up in a world where the color of someone's skin doesn't change anything in the way they think about them. So how do I how do I lead that way in an area that tends to be racially charged?
Um, so I literally was just on this conversation with another leader of mine who has an opportunity to speak to some of our state representatives, and he asked me if I was to tell them, if I was to have a minute to tell them something, what would I tell them? Because he was curious, you know. And but then this whole conversation just continued on just through conservative values and those kind of things, um, and I told my friend, and I said, listen, we first have to take ownership for our own racial biases. We all have them. We have to help people to understand that they have biases inside of them. We can't even look outside to solving things outside until we acknowledge that it's inside of us. You know, we can't stop judging someone until we realize that we judge ourselves. You know, I mean, I say it in our church all the time. You know, driving the car. You know, every group has their minority bias, right? Whites, African Americans, you name it, right? And you drive on the road, and what's the first thing we say? Man, can you believe the way that beep, you know, not a cuss word, but that, you know, group drives? They don't know how to drive. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, that's a small piece. But
I'm glad you say that, because there is a dichotomy in the human condition that we just drift towards people who are like us, because there's comfort. That's why every large city, there's, you know, if you go to New York, there's the Italians, and then there's the Russians, and there's the Chinatown, and people of like, we just drift into that. And the idea of multicultural is actually a culture unto itself.
Right.
And there are some things that are just going to be there, but we have to work on what's in me. Mm-hmm. And as the church, that internal bias, if we cannot live, the gospel is cross-cultural. It works in any area. And if we're going to be gospel-centric, then we can't have those limitations.
Yeah.
On our prayer march Sunday, where we left the Life Center, and then we walked 2 miles south to where George Floyd was killed. There was about maybe 75, 100 of us from the Life Center, so the African American community in our building, and then there was literally 800-900 white Christians from all over the suburbs. Okay, and one of the comments I got over and over again when it was all over is our guests, our visitors from outside the city were so amazed at how well they were received. They in their mind, their fear thought that there would be people from the city throwing rocks at them, saying, "Go away, leave." You know, they couldn't. There were immigrants in their Chardots and in their Muslims who were walking with us. Maybe they weren't singing our Jesus songs, but they were walking with us side by side, you know, who joined the group. And so those kind of things broke down a bias that they didn't even know they were there, right? They didn't expect for the people in our church to say thank you for joining us, you know. So those kind of things that somehow we have to expose in our hearts thoughts and intentions that we wish weren't there. We all have them, right? And when it's there, we have to acknowledge it, and that's the beginning, you know.
they'll know that you're Christians by your love. And but that's, when you go back to Matthew 22 and the great commandment, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And that second one's the one that's really hard. Just love people.
Yeah.
Loving people it's not an easy thing. And if we're okay,
because we don't always like people.
That's right. That's for sure. So, Chris, as we're coming to the end of our time together, I'd like to, as this overarching topic is leading in moments of social unrest, what is that we haven't talked about in the dialogue that's been left unsaid that you think, hey, I think this would be important for leaders to hear?
Be intentional about listening to people with other beliefs. I don't care if it's racial experiences. I don't care if it's political experiences. Be intentional. Go out of the way to find somebody who thinks different than you, and just be honest and say, I don't get this. I want to learn. I realize that I've grown up a certain way. Can you please share with me your story? I've seen churches of almost all the large congregations in the Twin Cities right now on their online services, having panels, bringing in African American leaders, and just starting those conversations, right? And I think that that's some great strategic leadership on the church right now, being intentional, because let's face it, I don't know what can change in a week, right? Yeah. If they arrest the other 3 police officers who have not been arrested, who watched, right? It might reduce some of the protest, but that doesn't change anything. One thing that I'm really encouraged about in the protest here in Minneapolis is most of the protesters are young white kids, and that encourages me that the majority of the race in Minneapolis who are younger, the next generation, are standing up and saying, we will not tolerate this. And there's going to be a day when they're going to be in their own leadership, and they're going to be our police leaders, and they're going to be our political leaders. And I pray that they carry this mantle of equity and justice with them. It really is wonderful to see. And of course, some people would say, look at those stupid kids. They don't know what they're doing, right? I see it as an expression of change, because really, let's face it, really the affluent Anglo population of our country holds the power for change. We hold the political seats, we hold the finances, we make the decisions, right? And so change really won't happen until we respond with empathy and love and compassion to every person around us.
So let's be intentional about listening. One of the things that I do want to tell our listeners, because of all this, and to stay on mission, we're working to put together a panel, and in the coming weeks, we'll be recording some episodes with a panel to discuss this issue about leading this way. We want to do some listening.
Yeah.
We want to do some listening. Chris, this has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Todd, what's your takeaway?
I love what you said about darkness.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Darkness is not always evil. Darkness is sometimes just not knowing the outcome, is what I wrote down. And I think we're in that. I think we're in one, if that's the definition of darkness, we're in one of the darkest hours of our nation. We don't know what's going to be the outcome of this whole COVID-19 thing. We don't know what's going to be the outcome of all this racial unrest. But even though there is darkness, I do know that God is working and God is shaping. But sometimes as leaders, we have to be comfortable in the darkness and walking through that, because that's sometimes when the greatest change happens. So I really love it because I've always seen darkness as evil. I mean, we grow up in a very spiritual warfare stream of evangelicalism, but darkness sometimes is just not knowing where to go, but we're just waiting on God to turn on the light switch and show us the way.
Yeah. So, Chris, why don't you tell people how they can contact you guys, how they can follow you guys, how they can get involved if they want to financially give, if they want to come be a part of what you guys are doing. How can they contact you guys?
Probably the easiest way is our website, changingourcity.org, changingourcity.org. And on the website, you'll see stories, you'll see videos of lives changed through Jesus, right? Jesus is the greatest equalizer and change agent. Also, there's opportunities to sign up on our email newsletter. Every month, you'll get information of what we're doing, how you can pray for us, how you can give toward our different campaigns so that we can continue to do the work here in the inner city.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah.
Been a good day.
Been a good, yeah.
And I guess we'll see everybody else next time on the Advancement Podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.